Hello, I wanted to start to document my journey through modular, which has sort of evolved from Volkers into semi-modular into now sort of semi-modular stroke modular. And yeah, I'm having a lot of fun with it, but there's so much going on, so much to try and learn and absorb and understand. So I wanted to start to go through this process pretty much from a beginner's point of view. I think there's always going to be someone out there who knows a bit less than you. So maybe this could be of use to somebody. And at the very least, it's an interesting documentation of how things have progressed from where I was pretty much a year ago. So I've been messing around with synths for about a year, maybe 13 months, maybe. And yeah, I started off with Volkers and Stylophone, I think. Yeah, and NTS1, Monotron delay, all the sort of small synth kind of starter kits, which are brilliant. But then obviously sort of get into the kind of the vibe of the scene, and you get tempted by all these other flashy toys, and I had to sort of stop myself from jumping in with both feet, I think. And I've experimented with a number of things. I owned an OP1 for a while. I had some fun with that, but I found it too fiddly for me, so I sold that. And I had an OPZ for a while, kind of played around with that again. It was a bit too sort of fiddly for my fingers, so I sent that back as well. But I think where I've found the most fun over the past 12 months is with these two here, the Mother 32 and the DFAM from Moog. They are standalone machines in their own right. You can do so much with either one of these on their own. You just plug it into a speaker or headphones and you're away. There's so much you can do without even messing around with the patches. But you got the patch bay here on this side, and you can do all kinds of automation and routing, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun, but naturally sort of you realize that there are other things out there, and I guess that's the bridge between the sort of semi-modular world and modular. And at the moment I'm more semi than full, if you like. I mean, these two still generally form the core of any session that I do. But one thing I have been working on at the same time is this thing here, this Erica Synths Moritz Klein EDU DIY set of modules, which has been growing slowly over time, and is a really enjoyable process. I'm learning a lot. Haven't used them an awful lot yet. I feel like I'm maybe one or two modules out for this being a really useful addition. But for now, like I say, this is generally speaking, these are where I sort of focus my attention. And I had been running these on this sort of hacked, sort of standalone DIY set of shelves, but I wanted to encase everything. I mean, obviously Eurorack cases are not cheap things, and I'm on a massive, well, I'm on a budget on a massive level, as in I don't have a lot of money for this. So I've rigged up this very, very basic box to house my modules. So it's nothing more complicated than 4 pieces of wood measured to house these rails that everything sits inside. So you can just see down here, just about see it down there. We've got the Tip Top Audio Z rails. So I've got 2 84 HP, which is width Z rails, and the end brackets. which meant that once they're in the brackets, once the frame is built, you just basically screw it into a housing here, and then you've got your box, your frame, within which to hold all of your modules. And in terms of power, I'm using the Tip Top Audio Uzus, which came with the Happy Ending kit, which I'm not currently using. And that was okay. It's a floating bus board, so again, if you can just see in there, you've got these can't quite see it, but yeah, it's not a fixed board where you plug your modules into. It's just a floating bus board effectively, and there's a lot of ports for it, and it started off working great, but I did find that when I started to add more and more, I started to get some weird behavior. So I was clearly overloading the power module in its basic format, and then from a bit of research and reading the manual, I saw that there is actually a jumper setting that is designed to protect, I think it's to do with maintaining a minimum negative current, I'm not quite sure, but anyway, was basically told to take it off both jumpers and replace it on just one, and that solved the problem to an extent. So what I found was happening was with no changes, I could power one of these three things. With the jumpers changed, I could power the 32 and the DFAM, or the DFAM and Platts, or the Platts and 32, but never all of them at the same time. And that's basically because the headroom just couldn't handle, well, when I did the calculations on modular grid, I think I worked out that everything in here was way under the headroom that the power supply could deliver. What I didn't quite understand was that and again, this could be completely wrong, but this is my current understanding, is that when you power things on, there is a spike which is also included within that kind of headroom of the power supply, effectively meaning that I didn't have enough juice coming into the power supply to enable the power on of all of these things here. So I, long story short, had to buy a booster adapter, which is this brick here, which is pretty beefy. It kind of sticks right out the front of the case, which I don't like, and at some point I'm going to rehouse that around the side, but it solves the problem. So the Uzus that comes with the Happy Ending kit, if you want to run it with something with some you know, more than just some low level sort of maybe utility modules, and I'm assuming these are relatively beefy in power demand, you probably will need a booster as well. So that was a bit of a surprise cost, but you know, this is Eurorack, so I guess you should be okay with that. You just got to sort of make it work. So yeah, I guess without going into any noise, this was the sort of the snapshot of where I am at the moment. I've got a very basic case made. I think I've got the power figured out. I've got this DIY case ready to come in at some point as well. And in terms of modules themselves, I don't have a lot. So I've obviously got the DFAM and the Mother 32, which probably don't need any introduction, but are pretty awesome bits of kit. Don't think I'll ever get rid of them. The latest addition is Platts, which is a macro oscillator, and I think what that means is that it's a module that can create lots and lots of different types of sound. So you've got a range of kind of oscillator type sounds, and you've got some percussion type sounds, and you can play around with the harmonics and the timbre, and You can send signals into each of these things to make them kind of ebb and flow and oscillate as well, and it's really good fun. It's obviously a quality module, and I wanted to get it before they completely disappeared because they're not in production anymore. In terms of the other modules, not a lot else going on. I've got an AT, which is an attenuverter, I think. It basically softens the waves that you could use. So an LFO might go from nothing to full to nothing to full, and with something plugged in here, you can sort of ease that in, so it's kind of making the oscillations a bit more gentle. Then you've got the Bafaco in-amp here. That's useful because that lets me plug in a signal and then manage the volume of that signal before I route it somewhere else. So with Platts, it has a certain internal signal strength, and that is stronger, I think, than the internal signal strength of the Mother 32. So I need to somehow balance those things out to avoid clipping and so on. So that's another sort of new challenge that I've realised about Eurorack, is that you've got to be really switched on to things like signal strength and clipping and boosting and things like that. I've got a Racket Mult here, which is just a really nice, very cheap DIY way to take one signal in and share that across multiple outputs. Obviously here is the power, and this one here, this is a really interesting one that's going to take up a lot more of my time in another video, which is the Expert Sleepers ES8. Now what that does, it does a couple of very useful things. First of all, it's an audio interface, so that lets me plug in 4 separate sound sources into these 4 points here, and then when I record my session in Ableton, I can have 4 separate channels coming in, which means that when you do post-production, or you make a mistake, you want to edit something or add reverb to something or whatever it is, you can do it just on that specific track. So this could be 1, this could be 1, this could be 2 because it's got 2 outputs. So so yeah, that's a useful thing to have. But really interestingly, it's DC coupled, which means that you can send direct voltage control both ways. And in simple terms, that means that if you're running VCV rack or Bitwig or whatever system, sort of soft synth Eurorack system that you're using, let's say you have VCV and you have a clock divider in your rack in VCV, you can punch those signals through to come out of here. So if I had a signal divider in VCV rack that had 3 different outputs, one for the main sort of clock, another one was halved, and another one was halved again for whatever reason, I could plug each one of those 3 outputs out of here into any of these modules. I could hook up a sequence through VCV rack and send it out through one of these and into one of these receiving modules. So there's loads to explore there. Way too much for me to get my head around at the moment. I'm barely scratching the surface with this stuff, and while it's pretty amazing to have this functionality here, it does sort of, it is a bit daunting, because in order to harness that, you really need to understand what VCV rack can do, and that in itself is no small task. And then you've got all of this stuff to think about as well, and obviously there's a lot of patching going on here, so I'm going to talk about that another time. What else? I'm running some pedals as well. So I've got 3 pedals that currently just serve a signal coming directly out of Platts. So we've got signal coming out of Platts going into the microcosm for kind of crazy effects. Then it is getting a touch of delay from the DD3, and then it's getting a touch of reverb from the Mercury 7, and then it's going into the Expert Loopers audio interface. So I've been having some fun with that as well. But the nice thing about having all of this stuff open and not tucked away in sort of shelving is that you can quickly change things around. So I could take out the reverb and dedicate that to the DFAM, and take the delay and dedicate that to the 32, and take the microcosm and dedicate that to the auxiliary of the Platts, you know, or any combination of any of those things. So there's a lot that you can do with very little, and I guess I'm trying to avoid the trap of just buying and buying and buying stuff that I will always be catching up on how to use. And I think, from what I can gather, and I can kind of see the logic of this, that the more you have, you know, if you sort of accelerate your acquisition of gear, because, you know, let's face it, it's great to do that, you know, on the surface, but I think it probably has a detrimental impact on your creativity. And maybe, you know, you're buying these things to create good sound ultimately, unless you're a collector. But generally speaking, you want to create some kind of a good sound out of all of this stuff. And if that potential is being hindered by the fact you've got too much stuff that you don't know how to use, then that's a bad strategy. And in fact, what I'm trying to do is to be quite cautious with what I bring into this, and instead just stick with what I have and learn it inside out. And this is a great example of something that can do many things. And I'm nowhere near understanding what Platts can do for me, but I'm having a lot of fun with it. I've got one thing that I'm waiting for, which is another Mutable Instruments item, beads, which is hopefully arriving soon. And once that's in, then I think the only other thing I'll be doing is focusing on finishing the Erica Synths kit, and maybe some other DIY kits, but I'll probably leave it at that for now, and instead see what I can do, not only learning this stuff, but also trying to understand more about VCV and how I can incorporate that into this and make use of the Expert Loopers ES8, because that's part of the appeal, part of the art of the possible, really. If you can bring in external, even if you just keep it to utilities, you know, there's something called a Bernoulli gate, I think, which has like a probability sequence that takes a signal, and depending on your probability settings, sends it one way or another way. You know, even that alone, that if you can find one, probably £80 to £100. You know, you get that for free in VCV. You can use that straight away in VCV. So I'm going to be exploring more about how to slowly unlock some of the secrets of VCV into your hardware. So that's probably it for now. I've probably talked enough for one session, so I hope you found that in some way useful. I mean, yeah, I'm only doing this for a hobby. I'm a beginner, but if you do find this useful, consider liking or subscribing, because apparently I need to please the algorithm.